The blood-red sunset painted the Wyoming sky as Abigail Fairchild clutched her newborn daughter to her breast, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. The elder's verdict still rang in her ears like a death knell. No daughters. The Fraser settlement has no place for them. 3 generations of superstition had turned the isolated mining community into a place where female children were considered harbingers of disaster, bad luck that would collapse mine shafts and poison water supplies. "You have until dawn," the settlement leader had declared, his weathered face impassive as stone. "Then you and the child must be gone." Abigail's husband Thomas had stood silently beside the elders, head bowed in shameful agreement. The coward wouldn't even look at his own daughter, beautiful little Sarah with her wispy dark hair and perfect tiny fingers. When Abigail had pleaded with him in the privacy of their cabin, his response had chilled her blood. "It's just how things are, Abby. My father would have done the same." The settlement comes first. Now, as 1876 drew to a close on this bitter December evening, Abigail trudged through the snow-dusted hills with nothing but a small bundle of possessions, her daughter wrapped tightly against the biting cold, and the crushing knowledge that everything she'd built over the last 2 years had been stripped away in an instant. The distant howl of wolves made her quicken her pace. The nearest town was Rivercross, at least 3 days' journey on foot. She wouldn't survive the night in the open, not with temperatures dropping and a newborn to protect. As darkness fell completely, Abigail spotted a faint glow in the distance, a campfire. Desperation outweighing caution, she altered her course toward it. Isaac Vance sat before his modest fire, whittling a piece of pine and contemplating the vast Wyoming wilderness that had become his home. At 32, he'd seen enough of civilization to know he preferred the company of his horse, Buckshot, and the occasional conversation with passing strangers. The life of a cattle driver suited him, seasonal work that kept him moving across the territories, answerable to no one but himself. The sound of crunching snow alerted him before he saw the figure. Isaac's hand moved instinctively to the Colt revolver at his hip, then relaxed slightly when he made out a woman's shape in the gathering darkness. He stood slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Evening, madam," he called softly. "You're a fair ways from anywhere out here." The woman stopped at the edge of the firelight, clutching something to her chest. Her face was young but drawn with exhaustion and fear. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "I need help." Isaac noticed then what she was holding, a bundle that moved slightly, emitting the faintest whimper. A baby. His expression softened immediately. "Come closer to the fire, madam. You must be half frozen." As the woman stepped forward, her knees buckled. Isaac moved with surprising speed for his tall frame, catching her before she hit the ground. The baby let out a startled cry. "I'm sorry," the woman whispered, struggling to stay upright. "We've been walking since midday." "Easy now," Isaac murmured, helping her to a seat on his bedroll near the fire. "What's your name?" "Abigail. Abigail Fairchild." She adjusted the blanket around her baby, revealing a tiny face. "This is Sarah. She's 3 days old." Isaac's brow furrowed. 3 days. "Madam Abigail, what in God's name are you doing out here with a newborn?" Abigail's eyes welled with tears as she recounted the Fraser settlement's cruel tradition and her banishment. With each word, Isaac's expression darkened, his jaw clenching tight. "They cast you out for having a daughter?" he asked incredulously when she finished. Abigail nodded, gently rocking Sarah as the baby fussed. "They believe daughters bring misfortune. 3 mines collapsed in the early days after daughters were born. Now it's become law." Isaac removed his hat, running a hand through his sandy brown hair. "That's the most backward thing I've ever heard, and I've traveled these territories for 15 years. He shook his head, then set about pouring coffee from the pot near the fire. "Here, drink this. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning," Abigail admitted, accepting the tin cup gratefully. Without another word, Isaac began preparing a simple meal of beans and bacon. As he worked, he cast occasional glances at mother and child. Abigail was pretty in a gentle way, heart-shaped face, dark hair escaping from a once neat bun, and eyes that seemed to shift between blue and gray in the firelight. But it was the protective way she held her daughter that stirred something in him. "Where were you headed?" he asked as he handed her a plate. "Rivercross. I have no family there, but I thought perhaps I might find work." She looked down at Sarah. "Though who would hire a woman with a newborn, I cannot say." Isaac sat across from her, considering her situation. "I'm headed to Willow Creek, about a day's ride from here. There's a decent doctor there, which seems like something you both could use. After that, I can take you to Rivercross if you still want to go." Relief washed over Abigail's face. "You would do that, for strangers." "Madam, I've been a stranger in more places than I can count. Sometimes the only kindness you find is from folks who don't know you." He offered a slight smile, the expression softening his weathered features. "Besides, I can't in good conscience leave a woman and baby alone in this wilderness." That night, Isaac gave Abigail his bedroll while he kept watch by the fire. As she drifted into an exhausted sleep, Sarah cradled against her. She couldn't help but wonder at the turn of events. Hours ago, she had been utterly alone, cast out and terrified. Now, at least for the moment, she had found safety with this quiet, serious cowboy. Morning came with a pale winter sun and light snowfall. Isaac had coffee brewing before Abigail awoke. When she opened her eyes, momentarily disoriented, she found him checking Sarah's blankets, making sure the baby was warm enough. "Good morning," he said when he noticed her watching. "I hope I didn't wake you. I was just making sure the little one was covered properly." Abigail sat up, touched by his consideration. "Thank you. Most men wouldn't concern themselves with a baby's comfort," Isaac shrugged. "I helped deliver my sister's children back in Missouri, 5 of them." A shadow crossed his face. "Before the fever took her and her husband 3 years ago." "I'm sorry," Abigail said softly. "It was their youngest that nearly broke me," Isaac continued, pouring her coffee. "Little girl, not even a year old. I tried to care for her myself, but..." He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "My brother and his wife took all the children in. They're good people." Abigail sensed there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Instead, she asked, "How long until we reach Willow Creek? We should be there by nightfall if we make good time." Isaac nodded toward his horse. "Buckshot's strong enough to carry you and the baby." "I'll walk alongside." "I couldn't ask you to, you didn't ask," Isaac interrupted gently. "I offered." After a simple breakfast, Isaac helped Abigail onto Buckshot, showing her how to hold the reins one-handed while keeping Sarah secure with the other. He fashioned a makeshift sling from one of his clean shirts, allowing Abigail to keep the baby close to her body for warmth. As they traveled, Isaac spoke more than Abigail expected from a man who clearly valued solitude. He told her about the cattle drives he'd worked, the territories he'd crossed, and the oddly peaceful life he'd found in constant movement. Abigail, in turn, shared stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her journey west with her parents who had died of cholera, and her eventual marriage to Thomas Fairchild when she found herself alone at 19. "He wasn't unkind," she said of her husband. "Just weak. When I discovered I was expecting, he was pleased. We both prayed for a son, knowing the settlement's ways, but..." She looked down at Sarah, now sleeping peacefully in her sling. "When the midwife announced I'd delivered a girl, the light went out of his eyes. He wouldn't even hold her." Isaac's expression hardened. A man who can't love his own child because of superstition isn't much of a man at all. They stopped briefly at midday to rest and feed Sarah. As Abigail nursed the baby under a blanket for modesty, Isaac kept a respectful distance, scanning the horizon. "Storm's coming," he noted, nodding toward dark clouds gathering in the west. "We'd best make haste if we want to reach Willow Creek before it hits." The pace quickened after their brief rest. Isaac led Buckshot across streams and through stands of pine, taking shortcuts he knew from previous journeys. The terrain grew rougher, and Abigail marveled at the cowboy's stamina as he walked tirelessly beside the horse, occasionally steadying her with a hand on her knee when the ground grew uneven. By late afternoon, the threatening storm clouds had darkened the sky prematurely. The wind picked up, carrying the first stinging flakes of snow. Sarah began to cry, disturbed by the cold air despite her blankets. "There's an old line shack about a mile ahead," Isaac called over the rising wind. "We won't make Willow Creek tonight, but we can shelter there." Abigail nodded, trying to soothe Sarah while maintaining her grip on the reins. The temperature dropped rapidly as the storm moved in, and soon they were traveling through a curtain of whirling snow. Isaac took Buckshot's reins, leading them forward with unwavering confidence despite the deteriorating visibility. The line shack appeared suddenly through the snow, a small, rough-hewn cabin with a sagging porch. It looked abandoned, but solid enough to provide shelter from the storm. "Wait here," Isaac instructed, helping Abigail dismount before approaching the cabin cautiously, hand on his revolver. After determining the shack was empty, he returned for Abigail and Sarah, then led Buckshot to a lean-to at the side of the cabin. Inside, the single room was Spartan but dry, with a small stone fireplace, a rickety table with one chair, and a narrow bed frame covered with a dusty mattress. Isaac immediately set about building a fire while Abigail changed Sarah's swaddling cloths. Soon, warmth began to spread through the cabin and the howling wind outside seemed more distant. "It's not much," Isaac said apologetically, "but it's better than being caught in that blizzard." "It's perfect," Abigail assured him. The events of the past days suddenly overwhelmed her, and tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you if you hadn't found us." Isaac knelt beside her, his expression serious. "You don't need to thank me, Abigail. Any decent person would have done the same, would they?" She asked quietly. "My own husband stood by while his child and I were cast out to die. Then he'll answer for that someday." Isaac's voice held a certainty that was somehow comforting. He reached out hesitantly, then gently touched Sarah's tiny hand with one finger. The baby instinctively grasped it, her entire hand barely encircling his fingertip. A smile transformed Isaac's face, softening the lines around his eyes. "She's strong," he observed, "like her mother." Abigail felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. For the first time since Sarah's birth, someone was looking at her daughter with something other than disdain or superstition. Isaac saw Sarah as she truly was a miracle, perfect and deserving of love. As the blizzard raged outside, they shared the meager supplies Isaac carried: jerky, hardtack, and coffee. He insisted Abigail take the bed while he made a pallet near the fire. The small cabin grew cozy as night fell completely, the wind occasionally rattling the shutters but failing to penetrate the solid walls. Abigail placed Sarah beside her on the bed, creating a protective barrier with pillows. As she settled under the blankets Isaac had given her, she watched him stoke the fire, his movements efficient and practiced. "Isaac," she said softly, "may I ask you something?" He turned, firelight casting half his face in golden light, the other in shadow. "Of course." "You said you tried to care for your sister's youngest. What happened?" Isaac was quiet for so long that Abigail thought he might not answer. Finally, he sat on his pallet, staring into the flames. Her name was Charlotte. Everyone called her Charlie. A fond smile briefly crossed his face. "She was just 8 months old when my sister and her husband died. I was on a cattle drive when it happened, came back to find my nieces and nephews orphaned." He paused, his voice growing rougher. "The older ones, they were sad, but they understood. Charlie was too young. She just kept looking for her mama." Abigail's heart ached for him, for the children. "I tried for nearly a month to care for them all myself. My brother offered from the start to take them in, but I was stubborn, thought I could manage." Isaac shook his head. "I couldn't. Charlie got sick, nothing serious, just a cough and fever, but I panicked. Didn't know what to do for her. That's when I realized I was being selfish, trying to keep them when my brother and his wife could give them a proper home, a mother's care." "That doesn't sound selfish," Abigail said gently. "It sounds like love." Isaac looked up, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Maybe, but I learned something important. Loving someone sometimes means acknowledging when you're not what they need." The cabin fell silent except for the crackling fire and the muffled howl of the wind. Abigail thought about Isaac's words, about the kind of man who would try to raise 5 children alone out of love, then surrender them for the same reason. "Your niece, Charlie," she said after a while. "How is she now?" A genuine smile broke across Isaac's face. "Turned 3 this past summer. Healthy as can be, and according to my brother's letters, twice as mischievous as her siblings ever were. You visit them when I can. The cattle drives take me through Missouri sometimes." His expression grew wistful. Not often enough, though. Abigail considered this solitary man, who clearly carried deep affection for his family despite the distance he maintained. There was a story there. She sensed reasons why he chose a wandering life rather than settling near those he loved. "What will you do?" Isaac asked suddenly, changing the subject. "Once we reach River Cross, the question brought Abigail back to her uncertain reality. "I don't know," she admitted. "Find work somehow, a place to live." The enormity of starting over with a newborn child and no support struck her anew. "I was a schoolteacher before I married Thomas. Perhaps there's need for one in River Cross." Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "It's a growing town, might be." He hesitated, then added, "If you need more time to figure things out, I know some good folks in Willow Creek." The doctor's wife, Mrs. Peterson, is always looking for help with their children. "You would vouch for me, a woman you just met." "I'm a fair judge of character," Isaac replied simply. "Always have been." The storm continued through the night, snow piling against the windows and door. Sometime near dawn, Sarah woke crying with hunger. As Abigail nursed her, she noticed Isaac was already awake, sitting by the fire with a cup of coffee. "I'm sorry if she woke you," Abigail said. Isaac shook his head. "I was already up, habit from years on the trail." He poked at the fire, adding another log. "Storm's letting up. We should be able to make it to Willow Creek by midday." After a quick breakfast, they prepared to leave. The world outside had been transformed into a pristine white landscape, the morning sun creating a dazzling brilliance that made them squint. Isaac cleared a path to the lean to where Buckshot had weathered the storm comfortably enough. As they set out, Abigail found herself dreading their arrival in Willow Creek. It meant the end of this strange interlude, this unexpected companionship that had brought her more comfort than she'd felt in years. Isaac Vance was unlike any man she'd known, his quiet strength and inherent kindness a stark contrast to the harsh judgment she'd faced in the Fraser settlement. The journey to Willow Creek passed too quickly. As promised, they arrived just after noon, the small town bustling despite the recent snowfall. Abigail took in the wooden buildings lining the main street, a general store, saloon, church, and various businesses that indicated a prosperous community. Isaac guided them directly to a two-story house set slightly apart from the main street, a small sign identifying it as Dr. J. Peterson, physician. A woman answered their knock, plump, gray-haired, with a kind face that immediately broke into a smile at the sight of Isaac. Isaac Vance. "What a pleasant surprise," she exclaimed, then noticed Abigail and the baby. Her expression shifted to concern. "Oh my, come in out of the cold." Inside, introductions were made. Dr. James Peterson and his wife Martha listened with growing alarm as Isaac explained Abigail's situation. Martha's indignation was particularly vocal. Cast out for having a daughter. "In this day and age, it's barbaric." She immediately took charge, showing Abigail to a guest room and insisting the doctor examine both mother and baby. "Mrs. Peterson is right," Dr. Peterson said after his examination. "What that settlement did was unconscionable, but you're both remarkably well, considering your ordeal. The baby is healthy, though you could use some rest and proper nourishment, Mrs. Fairchild." "Miss," Abigail corrected quietly. "I don't consider myself married to a man who would abandon his child." The doctor nodded in understanding. "Miss Fairchild, then. Martha and I insist you stay with us until you're fully recovered." Later, as Abigail rested in the comfortable guest room with Sarah sleeping peacefully in a borrowed cradle, Isaac came to say goodbye. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hands. "The Petersons are good people," he said. "They'll look after you both." Abigail felt a pang of sadness. "You're leaving then?" "I have some business in River Cross, cattle broker I need to see about spring work." He shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I'll be back this way in about 2 weeks, though, to check on you and Sarah if that's all right." Relief flooded through Abigail. "We would like that very much." Isaac nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Take care of yourself, Abigail, and that little girl." As he turned to leave, Abigail called after him, "Isaac, thank you, not just for saving us, but for—" She struggled to find the words. "For seeing Sarah as a blessing when others saw her as a curse." Isaac's expression softened. Anyone who sees a child as anything but a blessing has forgotten what truly matters in this world. With a tip of his hat, he was gone. The 2 weeks of Isaac's absence passed more quickly than Abigail expected. Martha Peterson proved to be a godsend, motherly, practical, and determined to help Abigail establish herself in Willow Creek. When Abigail mentioned her teaching background, Martha immediately arranged a meeting with the town council. "We've been trying to establish a proper school for nearly a year," she explained. "The children are currently being taught by Mrs. Winters, but she's expecting her 4th child and has made it clear she can't continue past spring." To Abigail's surprise and delight, the council members were impressed with her qualifications and unbothered by her status as a single mother. By the end of the meeting, she had been offered the position of schoolteacher beginning in the spring, with a small cabin near the schoolhouse provided as part of her compensation. "It's nothing fancy," the council chairman warned, "but it's sound and has 2 rooms. We can have it ready for you by March." Abigail could hardly believe her good fortune. In less than 2 weeks, she had gone from homeless and desperate to having the promise of a respectable position and a home of her own. Sarah was thriving under Martha's expert guidance, and Abigail herself was regaining her strength and confidence. The only shadow on her newfound happiness was the lingering question of Isaac. Would he really return as promised? And why did the thought of seeing him again make her heart flutter in a way she'd never experienced with Thomas? Exactly 15 days after his departure, Isaac Vance rode back into Willow Creek. Abigail was sitting on the Petersons' front porch, enjoying the winter sunshine with Sarah bundled in her lap, when she spotted him coming down the street. Her heart leapt at the sight of his familiar figure astride Buckshot. Isaac dismounted in front of the house, securing his horse to the hitching post before approaching the porch. He removed his hat, revealing hair that had been recently trimmed. "Miss Fairchild," he greeted, a smile warming his features, "and Miss Sarah, you're both looking well." "We are, thanks to you and the Petersons," Abigail replied, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "Won't you come sit? Martha's making lemonade." Isaac settled into the chair beside her, his gaze drawn to Sarah, who was awake and alert in her mother's arms. "She's grown already," he observed. "Babies do that," Abigail laughed. "Especially when they're well-fed and loved." She hesitated, then asked, "How is your business in Rivercross?" "Productive. I've secured work for the spring drive." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've also taken a winter position here in Willow Creek. The livery stable needs help, and the owner's willing to provide room and board in exchange for my expertise with horses." Abigail couldn't hide her surprise or her delight. "You're staying in Willow Creek for the winter. Seems that way." Isaac's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that his decision wasn't solely about employment opportunities. Martha appeared with the lemonade, greeting Isaac warmly before announcing she needed to check on her bread. As she disappeared inside, leaving them alone again, Isaac turned to Abigail. "Martha tells me you've been offered the teaching position." "Yes, starting in the spring. They're preparing a cabin for Sarah and me." Abigail shifted Sarah to her shoulder, patting her back gently. "I can hardly believe how quickly things have changed." Isaac watched her with her daughter, his expression thoughtful. "You deserve good things, Abigail, both of you do." Something in his tone made her look up, meeting his steady gaze. The connection between them seemed to strengthen, a current of understanding and growing affection that neither had acknowledged aloud. "Will you tell me about your plans for the school?" Isaac asked, breaking the moment before it became too intense. "Martha says the building needs work." As they talked, Abigail felt a comfort with Isaac that she'd never experienced with anyone else. He listened attentively to her ideas for the school, offered practical suggestions, and spoke to her as an equal, something Thomas had never done. When Sarah began to fuss, he didn't grow impatient or uncomfortable, instead offering to hold her while Abigail finished her lemonade. The sight of Sarah's tiny form cradled carefully in Isaac's large, work-roughened hands stirred something profound in Abigail. This man, who owed them nothing, had not only saved their lives but continued to show a genuine interest in their well-being. The contrast between his behavior and that of Sarah's own father could not have been more stark. As winter settled fully over Willow Creek, Isaac became a regular visitor at the Petersons' home. He often arrived in the evenings after his work at the livery was done, sometimes bringing small gifts: a carved wooden horse for Sarah, fresh eggs from a farmer who'd paid for horseshoeing with produce, or wildflower honey from a beekeeper passing through town. Each visit deepened the connection between them. Isaac proved to be well-read despite his nomadic lifestyle, and their conversations ranged from literature to politics to the changing landscape of the West. He spoke candidly about his childhood in Kentucky, his time serving briefly in the war before being wounded at Shiloh, and his decision to head west afterward, seeking space and simplicity. "The cattle drives suited me," he explained one evening as they sat by the Petersons' fire. "Different scenery, different faces, but the work itself stayed constant. There's comfort in that kind of predictability." "Yet here you are, staying in one place for the winter," Abigail observed. "That's quite a change." Isaac's gaze lingered on her face. "Some changes are worth making." By February, the nature of their relationship had evolved from friendship to something deeper, though neither had put it into words. Martha Peterson, with her matchmaker's instinct, began finding reasons to leave them alone together, taking Sarah with her on increasingly transparent errands. "That woman," Abigail laughed after Martha had whisked Sarah away to show her the new quilt pattern, leaving her and Isaac alone in the parlor. "She's about as subtle as a thunderstorm." Isaac smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "She means well, she does." Abigail hesitated, then added, "And I can't say I mind her methods." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Isaac seemed to be gathering his thoughts, his expression growing serious. "Abigail," he finally said, "I've been thinking about what happens when spring comes." Her heart sank a little. Spring meant the cattle drive, his departure. "Yes, I've spoken with the broker in Rivercross, turned down the drive." Abigail's eyes widened. "But that's your livelihood. You've done it for years. There are other ways to make a living." Isaac leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "The livery owner, Mr. Daniels, he's looking to sell. His joints are troubling him, and his son's set on going to Denver." He paused, gauging her reaction. "I've been saving for years. Never had much to spend money on, living the way I have. I could buy it." The implication hung between them. He was considering putting down roots in Willow Creek, permanently. "Isaac," Abigail said carefully, "are you certain? This isn't the life you've known." "The life I've known has been solitary for a long time." His voice was quiet but steady. "Maybe too long." Abigail's pulse quickened. "And what kind of life are you considering now?" Isaac took a deep breath, then reached across the space between them to take her hand. His touch was warm, his calloused palm a testament to years of hard work. "One that includes you and Sarah, if you'll have me." The words came out with the weight of deep consideration behind them. "I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything." Tears sprang to Abigail's eyes, unexpected but not unwelcome. "Isaac, are you proposing?" Inelegantly, perhaps. A small, nervous smile crossed his face. "But yes, I am." Abigail thought of Thomas, who had courted her with pretty words but revealed a weak character when tested. Then she thought of Isaac, who had demonstrated his worth through actions rather than promises. The choice was clear. "Yes," she said simply. "We would be honored to build a life with you." The relief and joy that transformed Isaac's face made Abigail's heart swell. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I should warn you," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I don't know much about being a husband or a father. And I thought I knew what being a wife meant, but I was wrong." Abigail moved to sit beside him, her hand still in his. "Perhaps we can learn together." Isaac's free hand came up to touch her cheek, his touch reverent. "I'd like that very much." Their first kiss was gentle, a promise sealed with tenderness rather than passion. When they parted, Abigail saw in Isaac's eyes the same wonder she felt that amid chaos and cruelty, they had somehow found each other. "I should speak with the Petersons," Isaac said. "Ask for their blessing." Abigail laughed softly. "Martha will be ecstatic. She's been hinting about this for weeks." As if summoned by her name, Martha appeared in the doorway, Sarah in her arms. The older woman took one look at their clasped hands and beaming faces and broke into a wide smile. "Well, it's about time," she declared, bringing Sarah to them. "This little one deserves a father who appreciates what a blessing she is." Isaac stood, taking Sarah carefully from Martha. The baby gurgled happily, recognizing the man who had become a constant presence in her young life. As he held her, Isaac's expression was one of awe and determination. "I promise you this," he said softly to Sarah, though his words were meant for Abigail too. "I will spend every day making sure you know how precious you are." The wedding took place in early March, a simple ceremony in Willow Creek's white clapboard church. The entire town turned out for the occasion, curious about the newcomer who had captured the handsome livery owner's heart and intrigued by the story of her banishment, which had spread through the community despite Abigail's reluctance to discuss it. Martha Peterson had insisted on making Abigail's dress a practical but lovely blue ensemble that could be worn again for teaching. Dr. Peterson gave the bride away, and Sarah, now 3 months old, was held by Martha, occasionally cooing or waving her tiny fists as if in approval of the proceedings. "I take you, Abigail, to be my lawfully wedded wife." Isaac's deep voice carried through the church as he recited his vows, his eyes never leaving hers. "I promise to cherish and protect both you and Sarah, to be the husband and father you both deserve, and to remember each day what a blessing you are in my life." Abigail's own vows were spoken through happy tears, her heart so full she could barely find her voice. "I take you, Isaac, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand by you in all things, to make a true home with you, and to remember always that in our darkest hour, you were the light that guided us to safety." The celebration afterward was held at the town hall, with food contributed by nearly every household in Willow Creek. As husband and wife moved among their guests, Sarah passed from one admiring set of arms to another. Abigail marveled at how dramatically her life had changed in just 3 months. "Happy?" Isaac asked quietly, appearing at her side with 2 plates of food. "Beyond words," she replied honestly, "though I keep expecting to wake up and find this was all a dream, not a dream." Isaac's free hand found hers, squeezing gently, just a new beginning. After the celebration, they rode together to their new home, not the small cabin the school board had promised, but the comfortable house behind the livery stable that came with Isaac's purchase of the business. He had spent weeks preparing it, making repairs and adding touches he thought would please Abigail and accommodate Sarah's needs. As he carried her over the threshold, Sarah, already asleep in the cradle Martha had given them as a wedding gift, Abigail felt a sense of rightness that had been missing from her first marriage. This was not a union based on convenience or desperation, but one founded on mutual respect and genuine affection. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Abigail traced the outline of Isaac's face with her fingertips. "When did you know?" she asked. "That you wanted this us." Isaac caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "That first night at the Line Shack when Sarah grabbed my finger, I looked at her, then at you, and something just shifted inside me." His voice grew husky. "I'd spent so many years avoiding attachments, convincing myself I was better off alone, but in that moment I knew I'd been wrong. I was afraid to trust again," Abigail admitted. "After Thomas, after the settlement, I wasn't sure I could believe in anyone's goodness. And now—" She moved closer, resting her head on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "Now I believe in you, in us." Spring arrived in Willow Creek, bringing new growth and activity to the small town. Abigail began her teaching duties, quickly earning the respect of both students and parents with her thorough knowledge and gentle discipline. Each morning, she would walk to the schoolhouse with Sarah in her arms, where Martha Peterson would care for the baby during school hours in a small room adjoining the classroom. Isaac's livery business thrived under his expert management. His reputation for fair dealing and exceptional horsemanship spread throughout the county, bringing customers from neighboring communities. In the evenings, he would often bring Sarah to the stable, showing her the horses and telling her stories about his travels, despite her being too young to understand. "She likes the sound of your voice," Abigail observed one evening, finding them in the stall of a gentle mare. "She always calms when you speak to her. Smart girl," Isaac replied with a wink. "Takes after her mother that way." As summer approached, bringing longer days and the bustle of passing cattle drives, Abigail noticed Isaac growing restless. He would sometimes stand at their front window in the evenings, watching the trail hands ride through town with a faraway look in his eyes. "Do you miss it?" she asked one night. "The open range, the freedom of the drives." Isaac considered her question honestly. "Sometimes," he admitted. "It's been my life for so long." He turned from the window, taking her hands in his. "But what I have now is worth more than any freedom the trail offered." Abigail squeezed his hands. "It doesn't have to be all or nothing, you know. When Sarah is older, perhaps we could travel sometimes during school holidays. I've never seen much beyond Pennsylvania and Wyoming." The suggestion lit Isaac's eyes with enthusiasm. "You'd want to see some of the places I've been." "I'd love to. And I want Sarah to know the world is bigger than just one town." She thought of the isolated community that had cast them out. "I never want her to be like the people of Fraser Settlement, afraid of anything different or new." Isaac pulled her into an embrace. "You continue to surprise me, Abigail Vance." "In good ways, I hope," she murmured against his chest. "The best ways." That July, Willow Creek celebrated Independence Day with unprecedented fanfare. Tables lined the main street, laden with food for a community picnic. Flags decorated the storefronts, and children ran about with sparklers as darkness fell. Abigail sat with Martha and several other women, watching as Isaac participated in a horseback riding contest, demonstrating skills honed through years on the trail. Sarah, now 7 months old and sitting up on her own, clapped her hands in delight at the spectacle. "Your husband is quite the horseman," Mrs. Daniels, the former livery owner's wife, remarked. "Most of the young men in town could learn a thing or two from him." "He's a fine man in every respect," Martha added, giving Abigail a knowing smile. "You chose well, my dear." Abigail returned the smile, feeling a swell of pride as she watched Isaac expertly guide his horse through a complex pattern. "Actually, I think we chose each other." The summer passed in a happy blur of work and domestic contentment. Abigail's school duties were suspended for the season, giving her time to make their house truly a home. She planted a small garden, preserved fruits and vegetables for the coming winter, and began working on a quilt for Sarah's first birthday with Martha's guidance. Isaac expanded the livery business, adding a small blacksmith forge and hiring a local boy, Elijah, as an apprentice. The 15-year-old reminded Isaac of himself at that age, eager to learn, respectful, and good with animals. "That boy worships the ground you walk on," Abigail observed one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset while Sarah played with wooden blocks at their feet. Isaac looked embarrassed but pleased. "He's a hard worker, reminds me there's value in passing on what I know." As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and changing leaves, Abigail received an unexpected letter. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by the stagecoach that passed through Willow Creek twice weekly. The return address was Fraser Settlement. Abigail's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a brief note from Thomas. "Abigail, word reached us that you have settled in Willow Creek and remarried. I am glad to hear you and the child survived. The settlement has had a difficult year, 2 cave-ins and sickness that took 4 men. Some are saying it's punishment for how you were treated. I regret my part in what happened. If you would permit it, I would like to see my daughter someday." Thomas Fairchild. Abigail sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter for a long time. A mixture of emotions washed over her anger at Thomas's casual mention of the child, rather than Sarah by name. Bitterness at his sudden change of heart now that others questioned the settlement's actions, but also a strange sense of closure. When Isaac returned home that evening, she wordlessly handed him the letter. His expression darkened as he read it, jaw tightening visibly. "What do you want to do?" he asked when he finished, carefully setting the paper down. Abigail looked over at Sarah, happily playing in her cradle. He has no claim to her, she said firmly. Not legally, not morally. No, he doesn't, Isaac agreed. But that wasn't my question. What do you want? Abigail considered this, appreciating that Isaac was putting the decision entirely in her hands. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to tell him he forfeited any right to know her the moment he stood silent while we were cast out, but another part thinks Sarah might someday want to know where she came from, Isaac finished for her. Yes, Abigail sighed. Not now, though. She's too young and the wound is still too fresh for me. Isaac knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Then we wait. When the time is right, if it ever is, we'll decide together. Until then, this changes nothing. I am her father in every way that matters. Abigail leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. How did I get so fortunate? I ask myself the same question every day, Isaac replied, pressing a kiss to her lips. The letter was tucked away in a drawer, acknowledged but not allowed to disrupt the life they had built. As winter approached again, bringing with it the anniversary of Abigail and Sarah's banishment, they focused instead on the future Sarah's first birthday, their first Christmas as a family, the growing prosperity of their businesses. December arrived with a heavy snowfall that transformed Willow Creek into a winter wonderland. The anniversary of the day Isaac had found Abigail and Sarah in the wilderness passed without explicit mention, though both felt its significance. That evening, after Sarah had been put to bed, Isaac presented Abigail with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, turning it in her hands. "Open it," he urged gently. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When Abigail pressed the tiny clasp, it opened to reveal a miniature portrait of Sarah on one side and Isaac on the other, expertly painted by an artist who had passed through town the previous month. "Isaac, it's beautiful," she breathed, tears welling in her eyes. "Look at the back," he instructed. Engraved on the reverse of the locket were the words, "For the blessings that found me." "You're the one who found us," Abigail reminded him as he fastened the chain around her neck. Isaac shook his head. "I may have been the one walking, but you two were the ones who appeared when I needed you most." His voice grew husky with emotion. "I was lost before you, Abigail, just didn't know it." On Sarah's first birthday, a small celebration was held at their home. The Petersons attended, along with several families from town whose children Abigail taught. Sarah, now walking with assistance and babbling a few recognizable words, was the center of attention, delighting in the colorful paper decorations and the tiny cake Martha had baked especially for her. "Da-da," she called clearly when Isaac entered the room after tending to a late customer at the livery, reaching her arms up to him with absolute trust and affection. The word, her first clear use of it, stopped conversations around the room. Everyone knew Sarah's history, knew that Isaac had come into her life when she was just days old. The significance of the moment was lost on no one. Isaac's eyes met Abigail's across the room, both of them momentarily overwhelmed by emotion. Then he scooped Sarah up, swinging her gently through the air as she giggled with delight. "That's right, little one," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "I'm your da-da." Later, after the guests had departed and Sarah slept peacefully in her crib, Abigail found Isaac standing in the doorway of the nursery, watching their daughter sleep. "She knows," Abigail said softly, slipping her arm around his waist. "Children have a way of recognizing who truly loves them." Isaac pulled her close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I've been thinking about Thomas's letter," he said after a moment. Abigail looked up, surprised. "What about it? Maybe we should invite him to visit in the spring." When Abigail stiffened slightly, he hurried to explain. "Not for his sake, but for Sarah's, and for yours." "For mine?" Abigail asked, puzzled. "For closure," Isaac clarified. "So you can show him and yourself that what happened was his loss, not yours, that you've built something beautiful from the ashes of what he destroyed." Abigail considered this perspective, seeing the wisdom in it. "Perhaps you're right, not right away, but someday." As they stood together in the quiet house, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. A year ago, she had been cast out, deemed worthless for bearing a daughter. Now she stood beside a man who saw both her and Sarah as precious beyond measure, in a community that valued their contributions. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best," she replied. "If I hadn't been banished, I would never have found you. Sarah would never have known what it truly means to have a father." Isaac's arms tightened around her. "Then I'm selfishly grateful for their cruelty, because it brought you both to me." Spring arrived again, bringing with it new beginnings. Abigail's school flourished, with enrollment increasing as word of her teaching methods spread throughout the county. Isaac's livery had become the preferred stable for travelers passing through, his reputation for fair dealing and expert care of animals widely recognized. Sarah, now 15 months old, was growing into a spirited, curious toddler who delighted in exploring the world around her. She followed Isaac around the stable whenever possible, solemnly handing him tools and giggling when the horses nuzzled her hair. At home, she helped Abigail with household tasks, her babbling commentary a constant soundtrack to their days. In April, they received another letter from Thomas Fairchild. Unlike the first, this one was longer, more detailed. He wrote of changes in the Fraser settlement, how the recent hardships had led to questioning of old superstitions, how 2 other families with daughters had been allowed to remain. He expressed regret more explicitly, acknowledging the cowardice that had cost him his family. After discussing it at length, Abigail and Isaac decided to respond with a brief, cordial letter. They included a small portrait of Sarah but made no promises about a visit. It was a step toward the closure Isaac had spoken of, an acknowledgement without obligation. As summer approached once more, Abigail discovered she was expecting a child. The news filled both her and Isaac with joy and a touch of anxiety. What if it's another girl? Abigail asked one night as they lay in bed, her head on Isaac's chest. Isaac's hand moved to rest protectively over her still flat stomach. "Then we'll have 2 perfect daughters instead of 1, he replied without hesitation. "And any man who sees that as anything but a blessing is a fool." The certainty in his voice banished the last lingering shadow of the Fraser settlement's cruelty from Abigail's heart. This was a man who would love their children unconditionally, regardless of gender or circumstance. A man who had looked at a desperate woman and newborn girl in the wilderness and seen not a burden but a blessing. In December 1878, exactly 2 years after Isaac had found Abigail and Sarah in the snow, their second child was born, a boy they named James, after Dr. Peterson, who had been so instrumental in their early days in Willow Creek. As Isaac held his son for the first time, Sarah peering curiously at her new brother from her perch on the bed beside Abigail, he marveled at how completely his life had transformed in such a relatively short time. "I was thinking," he said as he placed James in Abigail's arms and lifted Sarah onto his lap, "that we might visit my brother's family in Missouri next summer. I'd like the children to meet their cousins." Abigail smiled, remembering her promise that they would travel someday. "I think that's a wonderful idea, and perhaps afterward we could see some of those places you've told me about." Isaac's eyes lit with pleasure at the suggestion. "The children would love the mountains in Colorado, and there's a waterfall in Idaho that's like nothing you've ever seen." As they sat together, making plans for adventures to come, Abigail felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey that had begun in desperation, cast out for bearing a daughter, had led her to a man who embraced fatherhood with his whole heart, who saw their children as the treasures they were. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and silent against the windows. Inside, the Vance family, forged not by blood alone but by choice and love and commitment, remained warm in the circle of their shared affection, secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other exactly what they needed most. And Sarah, the daughter once deemed unworthy of life by a community blinded by superstition, slept peacefully in the arms of the man who had said, when it mattered most, "Then let me be her father," words that had changed everything for all of them.